Dan is going to talk a little bit. Well, first of all, Dan is currently a professor of environmental science at the University of Lethbridge with research in biogeography, environmentally sustainable agriculture, and a whole bunch of other things. I want to ask you to help me welcome Dan. He's going to talk about can managing grasshopper outbreaks be sustainable? So, Dr. Johnson, I believe. Thank you.
Like that? Okay, thank you very much. Sustainability is a big topic, and it's a diverse topic. So I'm going to talk about whether or not outbreaks and outbreak control can be sustainable in a number of ways. And there's a couple of things in here that might surprise you. So what is sustainable? What does sustainability mean? Basically two things, right? Continuing, reliable, effective. But secondly, we don't throw away things that we're going to need later. And that's all there is to sustainability. So we want to have control in a sustainable way that's going to last, but we also want to do it in such a way that we are ready for the next outbreak, and that's what I'll talk about today. So that, for example, is not sustainable on a week or monthly basis. That one's not either in dryland rotation. That sort of attack by grasshoppers has happened a lot in the past, and it's been happening again now. So this next one is July 2023, and that's why we're interested in what's happening with species. There was a lot of that, of course, everybody knows, from here to Medicine Hat and up to Empress and into Saskatchewan, and there are mainly two species of grasshoppers. And even though I want to talk about sustainable outbreak control, I know people would like to be refreshed in their memory of what the species look like, so I'll talk about them. But the other thing about its sustainability, the main thing I want to talk about, is that it's divided into economically sustainable, which of course is extremely important. It's the most important thing. Environmentally, so it fits into environmental farm plans and so on, but also ecologically. Now, why would it have to be ecological? Well, I'm coming to that. It's important. It's kind of surprising. First of all, I'll say that economically, we've been hit with a lot of problems, right? So Cyhalothrin lambda was taken off the market. And is that a sustainable move or not? I don't know. Did they ask you? They didn't ask me, right? Why did they do that? Well, I think they did it on the basis of toxicity and toxicity alone. So it's a sudden move, and it's caused some impacts on sustainable grasshopper control. And everyone's trying to figure out what to do without it. But there are new products. That's a good thing. I wasn't expecting there would be, but there are new products. There's why they did it, I think. Those are LD50s. So that's parts per million, same as milligrams per kilogram. That would have to make you very, very sick. And lambda cyhalothrin is pretty low. So it's a toxic substance for a pyrethroid. But I kind of think, I'm not critical of other departments, but maybe we should have had a workshop and a group discussion on this instead of a sudden move, but nonetheless, we're faced with it now. So a little bit later, I'll talk about biocontrol. Organic producers, I don't know if there's any here, but organic producers invited me to Saskatchewan last summer to talk. And I hate to say it, after years and years and years and years of working on biocontrol and microbial control and all the ins and outs of that side of things, but I think it's going to be quite a niche pest control method for grasshoppers. I don't think it's a sustainable, large-scale, hard for me to say that. I worked on it really hard. That's me as a young man, browner and thinner in Africa, doing testing against locusts and grasshoppers. They have a whole different set. Nasty bunch. Oh, by the way, this was why I have the t-shirt on today. I'm part of a worldwide group on grasshoppers and locusts. And we try to have the same message, and the messages disappear a little bit whenever we get an outbreak because it changes every time. There's Bovaria bassiana. That's one of about 10 that we've used. Grad student Susan Enns discovered a new one, a new metarhizium that's just an Alberta metarhizium. So we actually have our own, but they'll never really be good for more than a few hundred hectares at a time, I don't think, unless we move forward. And sometimes when you move forward, you mix them together. So BC government says This is just one of many. I could pick any state or province. This is what sustainable integrated pest management is formed from. And one is behavioral. What is that? Biological and chemical. Well, a while back I found out that you could change the behavior of grasshoppers with a tiny, 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 tiny bit of pyrethroid, lambda-cyhalothrin, which is now illegal, or deltamethrin. What does it do? It drives them into the grass. Well, that tiny bit of pesticide doesn't kill them, just drives them into the grass for a day. But if they have spores, fungal spores, then they get sick. So the two working together sometimes will do it. So maybe we can make sustainability by coming up with innovation like that. But we don't have that kind of time whenever an outbreak hits. But we're so much more sustainable than we used to be. They had no pesticides in the past. They'd put tar and oil on hopper dozers and drag them through the fields. So yeah, we're way, way ahead of that, of course. And I can't help but mention, who's read Little House on the Prairie? Probably almost everybody. Remember the grasshoppers came and ate the wash off the line and ate the shovel handles? That really happened. 1848, 1871, 1876, 1877, that really happened. That grasshopper's gone. It's extinct now, just like the passenger pigeon. It's called the Rocky Mountain locust. And here's the only funny slide. It flew all the way to Calgary and ate the tents of the Northwest Mounted Police. So what did they do about it? Arsenic, lead, arsenite, arsenate. It's all over the prairies. You can't see that from there, but I can tell you that hundreds of thousands of pounds of arsenic went into the soil in a kind of a futile way of killing grasshoppers. So we're way better than that. By the way, one of my favorite maps, you can't see it from the back, but it says down the bottom, 90,000 bushels, 100,000 bushels, 200,000 bushels per township of arsenic. Anyway, let's talk about the present. What is an outbreak anyway? Here's the point of my talk today. Weather allows them to escape, but in between they're controlled by natural means. So they've got natural enemies, like almost all insects, but they're a complex group, but in between they're held down by ecosystem services for free. Right now, they're in their eggs. That's them in their eggs. I took the photo in my lab. They'll come out in the spring. They hatch. You can see the cute little eyes and legs in there. If you take some grasshopper eggs that you find in a field, put them in bleach for 10 minutes, take a look and see a baby grasshopper in there, it's coming out in days. But if it's just a dot like a chicken embryo, weeks. That's not a bad rule of thumb. Anyway, back to this. They increase their rate of growth as the temperature increases, so they all have curves like this, and they're particularly adapted to hot weather. Everybody knows that here. Hot and dry is good for them. And there's another shot of the embryos. I can't stop taking pictures of insects, I'm sorry. So I know some people want to see what the different ones that are out there are right now. So I throw in some slides, and I'll go quickly if you don't mind. Two-striped grasshoppers has 2 stripes. Who knew? When they come out in the spring, though, they don't look at all like that. So I'm going to make available some little posters that have all the 1-day-old and 1-week-old grasshoppers. If people would like to have those, anybody can ask me for one. In fact, I'll give some to you, Jamie. Can I do that? Yeah. And I don't know how you want to redistribute them, but we have it as JPEGs and PDFs. Anybody wants to get it in the email or post it on a website or throw it on your Facebook or whatever. 1-day-old grasshoppers so that you can recognize them. Now here's the problem. They get a little older and their colors change and they're hard to tell apart, but those all have 2 stripes on the back. That's the 2-striped grasshopper. 2 stripes, 2 stripes. Posing on a flower to look better, but it's not fooling anybody, right? 2-striped grasshopper. And the little black and white grasshopper in the spring, that's the one that caused the disaster around 2002 up at Coronation Consort, Youngstown. That's 99% of it right there. Little black and white grasshopper. Later, it's brown. That's the clear-winged, and there's what it looks like, blotchy. So if you drove up through Acadia Valley, Empress, Oya, and any of those places last summer, these were all over the windshield. That's the one. It feeds on grasses, wheat, barley, grass. And there's 2-striped and Packards, and there's another one that used to be big, Lethbridge migratory grasshopper. It's kind of irrelevant right now. It's only a few percent. Okay, I'll move forward into what I'm going to talk about today. The problems with sustainable control of outbreaks is it's not one insect, of course. So if you look at northern Alberta, there's one called Brunner that feeds on broadleaf plants. In fact, it'll eat the thistle out of a wheat field. Down here, two-stripe and clearwing. And I hate to say it, but the only way to tell what they're going to do to the crop, two ways actually, look for damage. Threshold concept, not very important with grasshoppers. Look for damage. Secondly, learn to tell the species apart. There's lots of resources on the web. I wrote a little book. Would you remind me how much time I have as I go?
20 minutes.
20 left? Okay, so let me back up. Again, sustainability, economical, environmental, and ecological. So where does the ecology come in? Well, long ago, they sprayed by the calendar, or they saw some and they sprayed them. They didn't know. I mean, plus $2 an acre to spray in 1980. So it's a different ballgame now. Of course, we have integrated control, which is a mix of things, and integrated pest management, which ties in the monitoring and the surveying, the taxonomy, and so on. Action thresholds, what are those? Everybody knows about action thresholds. Where do they come from? They come from this. This is called the economic injury level. C is the cost of control divided by the damage. So when those are equal, that's the action threshold. So why is that going to help us with the environment? I mean, there's a little problem there. If we post it somewhere, people will be able to work it out and tell that I'm not lying. But anyway, the cost over the damage per insect and how much they do and how many there are and so on. So when that's balanced, that's the threshold. So what can we do about that? Those are the 4 of the 50 people that put this together. What can we do about that with respect to the environment? Well, here's one we worked out just with the economics, and it says 0.27 of that particular bug, whichever one it is, per plant is the threshold. So you go out, you count, it's cotton, it's apples, whatever, and you take action. And it ends up looking like this. As the cost of spraying goes up, so does the threshold, and you spray less and less as the cost goes up. So there's ways to manipulate that particular thing. But how can we put environment in there? Well, one way would be in the top. So there's cost, economic cost. We could add an ecological cost. How do you estimate that? Well, there are a lot of ways. One is any harm for the ecosystem, and we're used to that. We're used to people like me talking about leave some for the birds. They're not all pests. I've been saying that since 1980 or something like that, and so on and so on. But there's way, way more to it than that, and that's the thing I want to talk about today. So sustainable means over long periods of time, and it means getting the ecology to work for you. You see the flat spots in between where I put natural control. Who is doing that, right? What is doing that? Well, partly it's weather. I mean, everybody knows that we set so many records last year, monthly records, daily records, seasonal records, and so on. A lot of broken records. And grasshoppers just came pouring out of the woodwork because of that, but they have to have a couple of years before that happens. So curves typically look like this. You can't see from the back, I'm sorry, but where the arrow's pointing, Edmonton was the hot spot in May. Things like that are just so bizarre. And what happened? 3 weeks early, the grasshoppers were 3 weeks early, and they went all over even the Edmonton International Airport was covered with grasshoppers, and it drew in the birds, and they had to take action against bird strike. So there's all kinds of complications that come out of this when weird weather, 31 degrees in Edmonton in May? Holy cow. Anyway, this is a bunch of histograms of all the weather data for, I think I had 50 years for Lethbridge. Those little dark ones up at the top all the time, that was last year. So there's lots of high records. And again, because of the distance, you probably can't see, but in the summertime, you see those lines are sloping up. Those are the averages for June, July, August temperature, daily temperature over 50 years. So it's the summer that's getting hot, and that's good news for grasshoppers. Now, what holds them down in between? Oh, this is June, right? Or July. That's July. I couldn't remember which one I grabbed as an example. July, over all those years, well, yeah, it's not always up, but we have to be prepared for a trend. Now here's the other problem, north versus south. In the south, the grasshopper outbreaks climb slowly and then dissipate, and climb slowly and then dissipate. In the north, they go up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Odd years have a lot of grasshoppers. And weirdly, my friend Dennis Fielding in Alaska says, yeah, us too, just like the piece, except it's the other way. It's high in the even years. No one knows what this is all about. We don't have time. But it's just every other year in the north. So it's a whole different ballgame. You know what it means when it's every other year, right? That means the forecast is always wrong. Of course, because we use the forecast, we use the breeding population to predict, so it's always wrong. So we've got to fix that. We got to fix that, and people are working on it. Now, let me see, and this is one way, and it's laborious, I'm sorry, but the Agriculture Service Board fieldmen and the AAAF surveyors, all those people, God bless them, collected 1,000 bags of grasshoppers for me. We had them in the freezer until I finally identified 15,000 individual grasshoppers. There was one that was smashed, I couldn't do, but other than that, 15,000 grasshoppers, 35 species, and the differences between north and south are amazing, totally different, and you can't blame anybody for being confused about why they're getting control or not getting control. So we made them little kits that tell them apart. I'm happy to work with them anytime. That's my staff. You know, you work for the university, you don't have technicians, you have kids. Anyway, oh, sorry, again, it's too far away to see, but I'll just tell you this. This Brunner that's causing a stir in the north, 60%, 50% of the grasshoppers are that species. You know what they are here? 1 in 10,000. You can go to Cypress Hills and find them. You can go to Milk River Ridge and find them because they're kind of a fescue-y type of a species up in the foothills, but here it just doesn't happen. So you could completely be controlling them the wrong way. You know, everybody, I mean, I'm out to lunch half the time. And county to county, the outbreaks are not always the same. So I'm coming to a point here. Oh yeah, I just couldn't help but throw this in. These are southern counties, and those are time trends. They tend to be high, and then they go low, and then they go high, and then they go low. Everybody knows that. Look what it does in the Peace and Athabasca. Up, down, up, down. It's no wonder it's frustrating. Nobody could figure it out. We first started noticing this in the 90s and thought that can't be right. Didn't really have any survey data for the Peace then. And then when the province really got them to send in data, 2003 till now, they're doing a fantastic job, Fairview and so on, fantastic. Yeah, there's the pattern, and it is strong. Look, it's just amazing. You show a time trend like that to an economist, they'll say you're a liar. So here's my main point today. What is ecological sustainability and why does that help us? Well, everybody knows, like I said, that we're saying leave some for the birds, leave some for the birds, but there's more to it than that. It's your bottom line. Rob, do you remember this old thing? That's like the 80s, right? Holy smokes. But let's not talk about the 80s, let's talk about the future. So in the year 2525, they're going to have super smart engineers, and they're going to build nanobots, and they're going to fly out there and they're going to kill grasshoppers. They're going to burrow in them and kill them, or they're going to make them sick. These nanobots are going to cost $1 million a piece, and every county is going to need 10 million of them. How does that sound? That's $10 trillion. Is it worth it? Well, that's probably the price of food in 25, but still, it's a lot of money. So 10 trillion, I was right. So what do we do? Are we going to do that? No, because we have them now, and they're free. All those non-pest species of grasshoppers are like the hosts, the development zone for the pests that come out and attack for the parasites that come out and attack the pest species. So if we want those little flat spaces in between the outbreaks to continue low like that for even maybe more years, we have to encourage those natural enemies. And to do that, we don't kill the non-pest grasshoppers because they harbor the enemies that kill the grasshopper pests, and we've proven that now. I'll give you some examples. On the left there is a grasshopper killed by a fungus, some grasshoppers being killed by a spider or a fly, robber fly at the top. Let me talk about one non-grasshopper example, and then you'll see what I'm driving at. If you look at a tomato or potato and you're really unlucky, you might find these little yellow eggs, and that's tomato-potato psyllid. And the little beady-eyed thing at the top is the nymph. and it becomes an adult and it spreads a disease. I don't want to get into this topic, but it's very bad for potatoes. Everybody's probably heard of zebra chip. So we had a 4-year national survey program on psyllids, and I discovered something that I never knew before. Well, I also discovered I love taking pictures of these things. They are very photogenic. But what I really found was that in these fields, while we're surveying for psyllids, with like 10,000 of these yellow sticky cards, there's a huge community of natural enemies out in those potato fields. I felt that I should give a gold loving cup to every potato grower I ever saw, because how did you do this? How did you get all these natural enemies? And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. We're just not spraying insecticide right now because we don't have Colorado potato beetle. That's it. Fungicide, yeah, a lot of that goes on, but it doesn't kill these natural enemies. We're lucky. I thought the surfactant might, but it's not. Huge community of natural enemies. So what happens if a psyllid shows up and settles down into this natural enemy community that's there to kill aphids and leafhoppers? It's gone. And that's great. And that's worth a lot of money. But if something went wrong and we started spraying insecticide again, then these guys would all be gone too. So in a way, keeping this big blanket of natural enemies is a big plus. And it works with grasshoppers too. Oh, there's another ladybird beetle. I like to take photos of them too. And one photo I took was even used on a pesticide. Well, this is a good one actually, because it is one of the whole new generation that's going to come out more and more now. Kills pests but not predators. We had a newsletter, and in that newsletter we had so many natural enemies posted. We had 15 different species, 20 different species of ladybird beetles out there. So one day I said, well, what are they eating actually? So I put 200 psyllids on a leaf, because it's way more than I ever thought they could eat, and one ladybug in each dish, and went home, came back in the morning, and every one of them was gone. They're eating more than 200 a day. That's worth some money, in my opinion. So we protect them. So that's one reason we're always working on these things, finding out what's there. Somebody said to me one time, a ladybug is a ladybug. What's the difference? But some are really busy. Okay, one more quick example, just a slide or two. Cabbage seed pod weevil. FIPA and Hector Carcamo are working on this. I can't stop taking pictures of this insect either, sorry. That's what it looks like up close and personal. And they're working with a wasp that has accidentally come to Quebec, and now it's coming to Alberta if we can wrangle it. And it will control a lot of cabbage seed pod weevil. Now what about grasshoppers? There's a fly that killed that grasshopper, and now it's going to go off and find a pest grasshopper to attack, and that grasshopper is a mountain grasshopper. That's not even a crop pest. There's a couple of maggots that just came out of a Carolina grasshopper, that's the black one with the yellow stripe that flies like a butterfly. Not a pest at all, but it harbors the enemies of the pests. Isn't that great news? I think it's great news. I mean, it doesn't kill them all, but even if it gives 20%, that's awesome. This is a sage grasshopper. It only eats sage, but it generates maggots that attack the two-stripe and the clearwing. And does it ever? Pupae all over the place. In fact, the clearwing grasshopper, which is everybody's biggest grasshopper enemy, and last year anyway, and the year before, sometimes up to 50% infested with maggots. So if we were spraying chemicals and killing the non-pest grasshoppers that make the maggots, I don't know, maybe that's a bad thing. I really haven't I don't have the data actually, I wish I did. And now I'll just flip through a few that aren't pests. Not pests, produces maggots. Not pests, produces maggots. Not a pest, not a pest, not a pest, not a pest. These are all rangeland species, they produce maggots. By the way, you know what this one eats? This is called Aeolipleides turnbulli. It eats Russian thistle and kochia. I've confined it with wheat and barley. It starves to death. Yeah. Anyway, not a pest. One last little bit of sustainability here. How much time have I got? Sorry.
7, 8 minutes.
All right. Okay, I worked on this for years and I had to give up because it's so hard to control. But the funny thing is, we could do everything with our incubators and our fetal bovine solution and our chemicals and everything else and never get this thing to germinate more than just like 1% or something. But in nature, it hammers the grasshoppers. We had the invasion of the west side of Lethbridge in 2021, remember? I don't want to say this because it sounds insensitive, but it's really interesting video to Google that and watch it attacking people's yards where you couldn't throw a loony and not land on a grasshopper. It's bad, really bad. However, if you remember 2021, July was really hot. And then about 2/3 of the way through, it rained. And hot and wet weather encourages this fungus, and there must have been 100 million dead grasshoppers west of town, just nailed. And they looked like this, all over crop and also all over weeds. And they didn't lay any eggs because they were too sick. So that really shut down that outbreak. Now, could we harness that? Maybe, but maybe we should find out a little bit more about its life cycle, because here's the interesting thing. At the upper top is one of the worst pests. That's the two-stripe, at the upper left. Lower left, that's Carolina, which is not a pest at all. Lower right is the other really bad pest species, the clear-winged grasshopper. And so I found some of them were being killed, and then in Cranbrook I found a good spot where they were being killed. Then I went to the Peace. In the Peace, the grasshopper that produces the most spores of that disease to disseminate later is a bog grasshopper that's never touched a crop in its life, in history, a bog grasshopper. So maybe if there was a way to conserve them, or maybe we could even use them in the lab to generate fungus to go out and spray. But at least let's not kill them. Okay. I just wanted to thank the Canadian Agricultural Partnership for this northern work we did. And part of our sustainability has to do with the fact that the populations in those big zones are so different. So we're going to try to improve that survey. This is the level of sampling that's done by the surveyors when they count. And like I said, I was so pleased that they went out and actually used a sweep net too. So in case you're interested in how it's done, we actually laid out something like 500 white platters from IKEA with the grasshopper brunch like that, and then identified them all under the microscope in mass as fast as we could go. And you know what? This isn't a brag, but I'm 70 years old, and I think I'm the only one that can do this in Alberta, and that kind of scares me. So I'm going to try to get some of this down in some books. We could have a workshop or something. Anyway, there's the Brunners, easy to recognize, nice and dark. But here's the interesting thing about the north. Again, it's not possible to see that, but those are our sampling points. And you see those big bars? The one on the left is Brunner, the pest. The other big bar, the second most common species, has never been a pest ever, anywhere. It's called the marsh meadow grasshopper, but it's the second most common species in the north. So we really need to train surveyors and farmers to just know at least the top 10 so they can recognize them. I think it's important because you can anticipate damage, but then you can also control spraying. And I think that's obviously every farmer I've ever seen at a workshop, that every grower and advisor has cottoned onto these things pretty quickly, because it's part of what they have to do for every other aspect of farming. There's just too much to know, but it's worth knowing these apart. One last thing, we're trying to come up with a better survey in the north. One thing we did was we took all the counts and compared it to all the sweep sample bags. Maybe we could just do like you do in canola. I mean, how many, don't raise your hand and be embarrassed, but how many people own a net? I do. I own about 25 of them. So if you get into canola and sweep, that's how you work with canola insects. And maybe we need to kind of approach that point of view for grasshoppers too. Take a sweep, throw them in the freezer, take a photo, send it to Dan, whatever. What do you have? I answer every photo that comes in my email. Well, grasshoppers, I mean. Anyway, last thing. We did a huge DNA comparison, top to bottom, Wyoming, Vanderhoof, Peace River, Cold Lake, Cypress Hills, Milk River Ridge, and we found some interesting things. I really can't go into it very much. Oh, this is just to remind me to tell you that these problems are going to go on so long that it's the young people that are going to have to solve it, so we have to keep training. That's my son in the lab. Anyway, this is neither here nor there, but if you look at the top and the middle and the bottom, those are 3 different regions, and those are DNA comparisons, and you can just see that there's a pattern there. There's something going on between them. They have slightly different things, and that's just one gene. So if we sequence the whole thing, a little bit more money, we can actually see where they came from. Now, it's interesting because it'll help us to attack them better when they attack us. But there's other reasons to be interested too. There was a refugium during the Pleistocene in the far north, Yukon and so on, and then one down in what is present-day U.S. And after the ice melted 12, 13, 14,000 years ago, they came together. And so the populations we have in Alberta actually came from the north and from the south. So that's interesting stuff. If you're interested in evolution of the horse and camels involved and so on, biogeography. But here's my point. If you look over at BC and up in the north, you can see that those haplotype balls are colored a little differently. You can actually see big separations, and Wyoming's very different. Am I out of time? Okay, just a little bit on biocontrol. I alluded to it. We've done a lot of testing around the world, and it's safe for vertebrates, it's safe for wildlife, but it's also often not very effective against the pest. So that's a really uphill battle all the time. We put together a world review of methods, and there's biocontrol, there's natural enemies, there's even birds and spiders and things, there's predators, prey involved, grasshoppers are the prey. Susan Enns, we actually went out and surveyed 100 spots in Alberta and found our own world isolate, Alberta isolate of a metarhizium that we've been using in Africa and Australia and China. And here's how it kills. So these things always look better in the lab than in the field, but down at the bottom there, that's days going on, and then that's percent kill. So they do kill grasshoppers, but like I say, they always work better in the lab than. And we actually mixed it up. That black stuff is solid spores mixed with oil and water, and a little bit of surfactant, and applied to lentils. So what we have here are the pre-treatment counts in 50 grams of spores, 25 grams of spores, control, and lorazepam before any spraying. Afterwards, the lorazepam, of course, just hammered them. But the biocontrol was slowly catching up. And then later, the lorazepam ones were kind of coming back. But the biocontrol continued to hold them down a bit. So maybe it has some potential, but I don't think it'll be a panacea. But we have localized places where we can apply it. Like, for example, airports. That's not an agricultural problem, but attacking it in the same way. Those Franklins are going to hit a CF-18 one of these days. So we did experiments for several years at Four Wing with lots and lots of grasshopper sampling and spraying of biocontrol agents. So the news on biocontrol is I like that research. I think it's important to do, but it's not going to solve our problems. I think our future problems are more specific and directed chemicals that are less harmful to the non-target species. And I think industry and research is stepping up to do that. I'm not in that area. But I think that's the future. And I think the other part of it is we have to stay on top of it. We have to know what species we have. We have to have a spring survey. We don't even have a spring survey of grasshoppers. It's always just the late summer. So we have to stay on top of it. In other words, we have to finesse it with some scientific approach and detail, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of that right now. I'm not patting myself on the back because I'm not government anymore. Haven't been for 20 years. But I think that the approaches that the provinces are taking are good, but we have to catch up on the level of detail, I think. So it's an interesting problem.
Thanks, Dan. We do have a bit of time for a couple of questions, if there are some. There's one right here. It's a microphone? Yeah, it's coming behind you. I have to leave this microphone for Dan to respond.
Thanks.
How do we monetize this grasshopper infestation and grow them for the WEF, since that's their goal for the protein source for our future? Just a joke.
But you know what? Around the world, there's so many countries that are actually supplementing with that, right? Someone told me you should quit your job as a university professor and grow grasshoppers and sell them. And I said, so I got the same answer when people tell me I should be a wood turner instead of a professor. I think fantastic. I could probably make $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year.
Thanks.
I got one too. You started to answer it in the last slides there, but I'm just wondering how the biocontrols and insecticide options can kind of work together. Where I feel like biocontrol has been something I've known about for a long time, but only seen it work in very specific instances. And just wondering,
Yeah.
how to make it widespread.
I think it's worthwhile in places where we can't use chemicals, like maybe around African villages or something, or maybe in an organic operation. That makes it valuable if you work out those calculations. And I also think you have to have exactly the right conditions, weather, pests, and everything. So it's a little bit more scientific, a little bit more carefully nuanced, but it has a role. But I doubt that it would ever be more than 10% of the spraying on the prairies, but that's a fair bit. And there's a niche market there, but we have to get industry involved. We've developed a couple of isolates, and then we've tried to find industry partners with fermenters and distribution networks and all that. That is so hard. Everybody wants it for free and walk away, and then they might not even develop it. So that's a tough problem. And I've had trouble even just getting research permits. I mean, this one I showed you on the plate, we wanted to go to the Sustainable Horticulture facility in Kwantlen and test it against grubs and things there because it does kill them, great, but we could not get a research permit from Health Canada and Ag Canada to do that. So there's a lot of restrictions on biocontrol. And then it was because it was a different ecoregion. But then they registered an isolate from the USA. So I don't pretend to understand any of that. It's not my area. I'm not a lawyer.
Any more questions?
If the politicians were better educated, what kind of progress do you think you can make following your research and so on, rather than them always putting on the brakes on you and not allowing you to do what you should be doing?
Yeah, the question is if the politicians were better educated. Yeah, it might not be education. It might be more like motivation and conflicts of interest and looking for votes and all those things that they need to do, I guess. But occasionally, one does get educated. Well, that sounds horrible. I'm sorry. It's not exactly how I meant it. But like Paul Martin sat down with a big shot chemist and invented the Canada Research Chairs program. And that's got so much research done in this country. I went to the university as a Canada Research Chair. So occasionally it works, yeah. And maybe when the economy comes back, it will again. But I don't know. I'm not optimistic, but I'm always optimistic, but the next few years, who knows? It's not a great time for science funding, but there's almost little niches and pockets where we can do it. And plus, a lot of us do it because we want to. So, and collaboration is greater and greater nowadays. And then all the RNA, DNA knowledge, we're trying to find that common ground.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dan. You want to give me a hand? Give me appreciation. And also here.